Right, so it's Halloween night. You probably got your costume ready and a bowl full of candy waiting. But before we get all swept up in the spooky fun, let's take a deep dive into the history of this holiday. Think of us as your ghostly guides tonight, leading you on a journey from those ancient rituals to the modern spectacle we know and love.
It's really remarkable how Halloween blends together all these ancient Celtic traditions and Roman influences and Christian beliefs. It's kind of a reminder that even our most lighthearted celebrations often have deep and complex roots.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little. We're starting with the ancient Celts and their festival of Samhain, celebrated on October 31st. Now, this wasn't just any ordinary day for them. It marked the end of the harvest and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a time that they very much associated with death.
And here's where it gets interesting. The Celts believed that on this night, the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead, it thinned, allowing spirits to return to Earth. Just imagine living with that belief. Did it create like a constant sense of anxiety, a feeling that the dead were always nearby? Or did it offer comfort, knowing that loved ones were never truly gone?
That's such a good question. It really makes you think about how different their worldview must have been from ours. But if they were afraid of these spirits, how did they deal with them?
Well, the Celts, especially their priests, the Druids, they saw this as an opportunity. They believed that they could more easily communicate with the spirits and predict the future. During Samhain, imagine like the flickering flames of massive bonfires, casting dancing shadows as they burned offerings and made predictions, and the people dressed in animal skins and skulls, trying to ward off evil spirits and maybe even tell each other's fortunes. It must have been both terrifying and exhilarating at the same time.
Oh, I can imagine. It sounds like something straight out of a movie. So it wasn't all just hiding under the covers.
Not quite. It was a time of both fear and reverence, a way of acknowledging the power of the unseen world and seeking guidance for the coming year.
That's a really cool perspective. It makes those spooky costumes seem a lot more meaningful. But as with many ancient cultures, the Roman Empire eventually came knocking. What happened when these two worlds collided?
Right. So by 43 AD, the Roman Empire had conquered much of Celtic territory. And as so often happens, instead of completely eradicating local customs, they kind of blended their own traditions with those of the Celts. You can picture like the grand festivals and sophisticated rituals of the Romans mixing with the more primal nature-based beliefs of the Celts. It's really no surprise that some fascinating combinations emerged.
So they basically threw a combined celebration. What did the Romans bring to the party?
Well, they had their own festival for honoring the dead, called Veralia, in late October. And even more intriguing is the connection to their celebration of Pomona, the goddess of fruit and trees. You might recognize her symbol, the apple, which could explain our tradition of bobbing for apples. It's amazing how these ancient customs can echo through time.
It's like these little pieces of the past still linger in our modern traditions. But of course, we can't talk about Halloween without addressing the big shift that came with Christianity.
Indeed, by the 9th century, Christianity was spreading through Europe and into Celtic lands. And that's where we see another fascinating layer added to this already complex holiday.
So did they just try to outlaw Samhain altogether?
Not exactly. Instead of outright banning it, the church seemed to take a more strategic approach. So in 609 AD, Pope Boniface V dedicated the Pantheon in Rome to all Christian martyrs, creating All Martyrs' Day, which was celebrated on May 13th. Later, Pope Gregory III expanded the festival to include All Saints and moved it to November 1st. Then, in the year 1000, All Souls' Day was established on November 2nd, specifically to honor the dead.
So they established holidays honoring saints and the dead, right around the same time as Samhain. It almost seems like a deliberate attempt to replace the pagan festival with something else.
Well, that's a very common theory among historians. It's likely that the church saw this as a way to channel those ancient beliefs into a more Christian framework. And it's kind of hard to miss the similarities in the celebrations, right? All Souls' Day, just like Samhain, involved bonfires, parades, and dressing up. But now the costumes represented saints, angels, and devils. Talk about a cultural mashup.
It's fascinating to see how all these different cultural influences can intertwine like that.
Yeah.
But how do we go from All Souls' Day to Halloween? I mean, the name itself seems pretty far removed from anything religious.
Yeah, that's another curious twist in the story. You see, All Saints' Day was also called All Hallows, or All Hallowmas, and the evening before, which just so happened to coincide with the traditional night of Samhain, became known as All Hallows' Eve. And over time, that just got shortened to Halloween. So even in its name, Halloween carries a whisper of its pagan past.
So even the name is a blend of old and new. It's amazing how these traditions can get layered over time like that. But this is all happening in Europe. How did Halloween make its way across the Atlantic to America?
That's where it gets even more intriguing. You see, early colonial New England, with its strict Protestant beliefs, wasn't exactly fond of Halloween. They saw it as this pagan and Catholic celebration, so it wasn't widely celebrated there. However, in Maryland and the southern colonies, which had a greater mix of religious influences, Halloween was more readily accepted.
So right from the start, there was a divide in how Halloween was perceived in America.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But even in places where it was accepted, it must have been pretty different from what we see today, right?
Absolutely. Imagine early American Halloween celebrations as more like communal harvest festivals, or what they called play parties. Neighbors would gather, share ghost stories, try to predict the future, dance and sing. It was a way to bond and celebrate the end of the harvest season.
It sounds a lot more community-focused than the commercialized Halloween we know now.
Exactly. But those early celebrations still had their fair share of mischief and spooky tales.
The spooky element was still there, just expressed in a little bit of a different way. But as America grew, so did its immigrant population. Did that play a role in shaping Halloween?
Hugely. Think about the wave of immigrants, particularly from Ireland, who came to America during the second half of the 19th century, many fleeing the potato famine. They brought with them their own Halloween traditions and folklore, which helped to popularize the holiday across the country.
You know, it's a classic American story, a blend of different cultures coming together to create something new. So at this point, Halloween is starting to take root in America. But what about trick-or-treating? Where did that come from?
Well, that tradition actually has its roots in a much older European custom called going a-souling, where poor citizens would go door to door asking for soul cakes in exchange for prayers for the family's deceased relatives.
So it started as a more somber religious practice.
Yeah.
It's incredible how these traditions evolve and take on new meanings over time like that.
Absolutely. And understanding this evolution is key to understanding how Halloween transformed. By the late 1800s, there was a growing movement to make Halloween less about spooky spirits and more about community bonding. Halloween parties became the most popular way to celebrate. But concerns about vandalism and safety also led to a push for more family-friendly activities.
So how did trick-or-treating fit into this new, tamer Halloween?
Well, between 1920 and 1950, trick-or-treating was revived, but this time it was geared towards children. It provided a safe and fun way for the community to celebrate together. And let's be honest, it's hard to resist the charm of costumed kids asking for candy. Plus, with the post-war baby boom, those home and classroom parties needed an outlet. What better than a community-wide candy grab?
It sounds like a recipe for success. You take an ancient tradition, adapt it to a modern context, add a dash of sugar, and you've got a nationwide phenomenon.
Indeed. And that brings us to the modern Halloween we know and love. It's become a commercial giant, the second largest commercial holiday after Christmas, which is mind-boggling when you think about it.
Seriously. It's come a long way from those early play parties and simple costumes. Speaking of commercial success, we can't forget about the mountain of Halloween candy.
Oh, absolutely. A whopping 1/4 of all the candy sold annually in the U.S. is purchased for Halloween. And it's not just about satisfying our own sweet tooths. Even our pets are getting in on the action.
Wait, are you telling me people dress up their pets for Halloween?
You better believe it. In fact, Americans spent an astounding $700 million on pet costumes in 2023. That's more than 3 times the amount spent in 2010. It seems like everyone wants to join in on the Halloween fun.
That's wild. Who knew pet costumes were such a booming market? We've really covered a lot of ground here, starting with ancient Celtic rituals and ending with, well, costumed pets. It's quite a journey. But we've only scratched the surface of this fascinating history. Stay tuned because we'll be back to unearth even more spooky insights and surprising facts about this beloved holiday.
Welcome back. You know, we've just begun to uncover the mysteries behind Halloween. There are so many intriguing twists and turns as we, follow its evolution.
That's true. We talk about trick-or-treating evolving from that more serious tradition of going a-zoling. But what about the costumes? Why do we dress up in the first place? Is there like a deeper meaning behind it?
That's another tradition with surprisingly deep roots. Remember those animal skins and heads the Celts wore during Samhain? Well, it wasn't just for festive flair. They believed that by disguising themselves as these creatures, it would actually help ward off those wandering spirits.
Oh, interesting. So it was almost like an ancient form of camouflage,
Hmm.
Blending in with the supernatural to avoid unwanted attention. Pretty clever.
Exactly. And as Halloween evolved, that whole idea of disguising oneself persisted. For centuries, especially in Europe, people were genuinely afraid of encountering ghosts on Halloween night, so they would wear masks, hoping to avoid being recognized by those spirits, like trying to trick the ghosts into thinking they were one of their own.
That's both spooky and smart. But what about those other Halloween icons, like jack-o'-lanterns and black cats? Do they have spooky origins too?
Oh, absolutely. The story of the jack-o'-lantern is a fascinating blend of folklore and practicality. It originated from an Irish myth about a man named Stingy Jack. Now, this mischievous fellow tricked the devil multiple times. But when Jack died, he was denied entry to both heaven and hell. And as punishment, he was condemned to wander the earth. With only a burning coal inside a carved-out turnip to light his way, the Irish called him Jack of the Lantern, which eventually just became Jack-o'-lantern.
Okay, so that's a pretty grim tale, but it explains the carving tradition. But why pumpkins? Weren't turnips more common in Ireland?
They were, but when Irish immigrants arrived in America, they found that pumpkins were much easier to carve. So the pumpkin became the new canvas for Jack's eerie grin.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting how these seemingly random elements combine to form these traditions. Speaking of things that seem kind of random, what about black cats? Why are they linked to Halloween, and why are they often seen as bad luck?
Well, that association unfortunately has a long and somewhat dark history. Back in the Middle Ages, black cats became associated with witches. People actually believed that witches could shapeshift into black cats to avoid being caught. And driven by superstition and fear. This belief actually led to the persecution of both cats and those accused of witchcraft.
Oh, wow. So essentially, black cats became victims of the witch hunts. It's kind of a sad reminder of how fear and ignorance can lead to cruelty. But it's also interesting how this negative image has kind of become like this quirky symbol of Halloween.
Right, it is a bit of a paradox, but I think it reflects how Halloween embraces both the light and the dark, the playful and the eerie. It allows us to explore our fears and anxieties,
Yeah.
but in a safe and controlled way.
Yeah. Speaking of fears and anxieties, what about all those Halloween superstitions?
Mm.
Like avoiding walking under ladders or breaking mirrors. Are
Mm.
those also connected to ancient beliefs?
Oh, absolutely. Many of these superstitions actually stem from ancient cultures, and their attempts to explain the unexplainable. For instance, the fear of walking under ladders. It might be a blend of practical concerns. No one wants a ladder falling on them. And ancient Egyptian belief, they believed that triangles were sacred
Yeah.
and that walking through one would disrupt their power.
So it's this mix of practical wisdom and ancient mysticism. That makes sense. What about breaking mirrors being 7 years bad luck?
Right, so that one is thought to have originated with the ancient Romans. They believed that mirrors reflected a person's soul, so breaking a mirror would actually damage your soul. And they believed it took 7 years for the soul to fully renew itself. Basically, breaking a mirror was seen as the serious spiritual offense.
Wow. That's fascinating. It shows how even these seemingly random superstitions often have these complex and meaningful origins. It
Mm.
really speaks to, humanity's enduring interest in fate and luck,
Mm.
and how we try to influence those forces beyond our control.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding bad luck. Halloween was also a time for seeking guidance and trying to predict the future. This was especially true for young women hoping to find love.
Oh, tell me more about that. What kind of love-related traditions do they have?
Well, there were all sorts of charming rituals and divination practices. For instance, in 18th century Ireland, a matchmaking cook might bury a ring in her mashed potatoes on Halloween night. Whoever found the ring was said to be the next to find true love.
That's adorable. Imagine biting into your mashed potatoes and finding an engagement ring. Were there other romantic rituals like that?
Oh, tons. Young women would toss apple peels over their shoulders, hoping they'd land in the shape of their future husband's initials. They'd stare into egg yolks floating in water, searching for, glimpses of their future love life. And some would even stand in front of mirrors in darkened rooms, holding candles and looking over their shoulders, hoping to catch a glimpse of their future husband's face.
That sounds both romantic and terrifying at the same time, like something straight out of a Gothic novel. It really highlights how Halloween wasn't just about spooky spirits. It's also about hopes and dreams, especially for young women looking for love and marriage.
Precisely. And it kind of reminds us that even amid all that darkness and fear, there's always that flicker of hope and a desire for connection. And I think that's one of the things that makes Halloween so enduringly appealing.
It's that unique blend of spooky and hopeful, ancient and modern. That keeps us coming back for more. It's this night where we confront our fears, embrace the unknown, and maybe even glimpse into the future. We've got more to unearth about this holiday. Stay tuned, because we'll be right back with even more insights and fun facts about Halloween.
We're back for the final part of our Halloween deep dive.
Learning about the history behind all these traditions really changes how I see Halloween now.
I completely agree. It's amazing how something as simple as carving a pumpkin or bobbing for apples can have such deep historical roots. It gives the holiday a whole new level of meaning for me.
Right. But before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the commercialization of Halloween. It's become a huge industry, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Halloween is second only to Christmas in terms of spending here in the US. Americans spend like billions of dollars every year on costumes, decorations, parties, and of course, mountains and mountains of candy.
Billions. It's kind of mind-boggling. It seems like Halloween has come a long way from those early play parties and homemade costumes.
It certainly has. And while some people might see this commercialization as a bad thing, I think it speaks to the holiday's enduring appeal. It's evolved and adapted to fit our modern world, becoming a true cultural phenomenon that brings people together, unleashes creativity, and allows us to just indulge our love for all things spooky.
Yeah. I see what you mean. Even though it's become commercialized, it hasn't really lost that sense of fun and community.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, who doesn't love an excuse to dress up and eat candy?
Exactly. But I think there's something even deeper going on here too, right? Halloween gives us a way to engage with those themes of death, fear, and the unknown, all in a playful and even cathartic way.
That's a really interesting point. It's like we get to confront all these universal anxieties and fears, but in this safe, almost fun environment.
Precisely. And it's not just about, our individual fears. Halloween allows us to explore those anxieties that we share as a society, whether it's through scary movies or haunted houses or even just sharing ghost stories around a bonfire. It's a way to process those fears together and kind of come out the other side, feeling a bit braver, a little more connected, and maybe even a little more alive.
Wow. That's a really powerful way to put it. You make me realize that Halloween is more than just a holiday. It's almost like this reflection of our humanity, our fears, our hopes, our enduring fascination with the mysteries of life and death.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as you put on your costumes tonight and head out to celebrate, remember that you're taking part in a tradition that goes back thousands of years. It connects you to those ancient rituals, to evolving beliefs, to this shared human experience of wrestling with the unknown.
That's a great way to think about it. So tonight, as you carve your pumpkins, indulge in some candy. Maybe even tell a spooky story or two. Remember that Halloween is more than just a night of fun. It's this vibrant tapestry woven from history, folklore, and our collective imagination.
Happy Halloween!
Happy Halloween, everyone! And don't forget to let us know what intrigued you most about Halloween's long and fascinating history. We always love hearing from you.